So after losing my 6th round game, this time I'm playing against the 4th seed of the tournament, actually this Indian International Master, and I did a bit of preparation before the game, but the thing I had to understand about this player was that he plays everything, so it was very difficult to actually do targeted specific preparation. I brushed up a few things here and there, but ultimately it was very difficult to predict like what exactly he would do, even on move 1, so he ended up going e4, but still no idea what he's going to do. I just play my normal Caro-Kann, and after this, he goes for the 2 knights variation. Earlier in round 2, I faced this interesting d3 variation. But okay, he goes for the sort of 2 knights variation, which is a very solid variation against the Caro-Kann. There's some theory to it, but compared to some other variations, not as much. The main line is where black goes bishop g4, and after h3, it's kind of difficult or very risky to keep the bishop here because after takes, g4 and knight e5, there's these sort of checks, and there's also h4, h5 ideas. So usually after h3, what white does is take and they give up the bishop here, but recently I'd taken a bit of an interest into another variation, which is to go d takes e4, and the idea is after knight takes e4 to go knight f6. This is very well known, but for the longest time I'd been a little bit annoyed by this move queen e2, which, okay, aside from having this sort of idea where if black develops a knight, you get mated, they basically just maintain their knight in the center, and definitely it's worth noting as well that if you just take and give black double pawns, this is basically a worse version of what you'd get out of a classical variation where white can play this variation after knight f6 takes, and you don't really want the knight on f3 of the pawn on f6 because it's very well restricted, so usually what white is going to do is play c3, bishop d3 and put the knight on e2 where it is a lot more flexible from this square. Whereas in the 2 knights variation, you can see that the knight is already sort of committed to this square, so you don't really get that option, and therefore white would really be best advised to find something else, which is why basically every strong player these days plays queen e2. And the idea is after takes. But one of the ideas, at least, is if black plays knight d7, because you want to understand that black, they want to develop their light squared bishop outside the pawn chain, but at the moment they can't really develop it to f5 or g4, and e6 doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. So what a lot of people do is they play knight d7, put the knight on f6, and then once they kick the queen away, then they can move the bishop outside. However, people have been facing some obstacles in this variation where after bishop c4, knight f6, white, instead of going like queen e2, allowing this move bishop g4, or maybe actually let's say bishop f5, because in fact, bishop g4 I think would just run into a very typical tactic. If you guys want to pause the video and try and figure out what it is, how I suggest you do so. But I think they can just play bishop takes f7 check, takes, knight e5, fork this, and they win a pawn. Maybe they could even go knight e5 immediately, since of course takes would run into mate, but they can maybe play bishop e6. Still looks horrible, but it at least does not lose a pawn. So, okay, what people usually do though, again, bishop f5, I think this is probably fine, like d4, e6, you develop your light square bishop outside the pawn chain, you develop and you're doing it pretty well. Whereas if you go knight e5 immediately in this position, you notice again, you can't take the queen because you hang mate, so usually this compels people to go e6 and only then queen e2, when black really has long-term issues of getting this bishop outside the pawn chain, and theoretically they are supposed to be okay if they play some like precise b5 move, which often involves like sacrificing c6 and stuff. There's a lot of precise theory, which to be honest, I'm too lazy to learn and remember, especially against a line like 2 knights, which is typically more positional and less like theoretical in general. So that's why for a long time I actually didn't like playing knight f6 in this position, because queen e2 I just thought it was a very annoying move to face. But a couple weeks before the tournament, I was looking through some random blitz games online by like some grandmasters, and I came across this move bishop e6, and I know I just said the bishop doesn't make any sense here, and it doesn't. The only reason we're putting the bishop here is because of the long-term potential it has by not shutting itself off with e6. And what I mean by that is, for example, like in this variation, right, when we had to play e6 against knight e5, well, that shuts in the bishop. But by putting the bishop on e6, we stop all these bishop c4, knight e5 ideas. And the idea is basically to delay playing knight d7, f6, but that's what we're still going to do on the next move, provided all else is equal. And only then we're going to move the bishop, unless we can maybe just move it to d5, for example. Like, for instance, if they just go d4 immediately, bishop d5 is already quite nice, because, like, they move the queen somewhere, we take, and if they take and give themselves double pawns, that's not great, and if they take back, we can also take that, and maybe they have compensation, but it's not really enough, which explains our opponent's move in the game c4. Certainly not the only move. I think the main one in the database is b3, but in general, the thing I like about bishop e6 is that, well, one, it avoids the whole dilemma we were talking about earlier, but two, also, it's quite rare, and definitely compared to knight d7, and also in comparison to this other move, queen d5, where black basically tries to create some sort of queen exchange, and if white does not oblige, black basically just keeps chasing the white queen around until it finally is forced. But to be honest, I don't really like this endgame so much, and it doesn't seem like a fun way to live my life. Unless you want to like take on c2, but this also has its own risks, let's say. So I find bishop e6 to be a good balance between not having that much theory, being pretty solid, but also still keeping quite a bit of play in the position. Okay, but c4 is what was played in the game. My opponent was also definitely out of book by this point, because as you can see, he spent quite a bit of time to play c4. I played knight d7. Couldn't exactly remember everything, was just trying to make sure I wasn't mixing stuff up. Knight f6, and in this position I ended up playing bishop g4 after about like a minute of thinking, which probably was already a bit of an inaccuracy. And I know I was just saying that bishop g4 is what you want to do, but the problem is concrete. Like, yes, I want to move my bishop out of the way so I'm not obstructed from playing e6. The problem is that if white rather, very quickly plays h3, there are some concrete issues I have to deal with. Because if I take, then I have the issue that long term, I'm going to sort of just be giving white the bishop here, and I'm going to be rather passive. And if I play bishop h5, there is a concrete issue in this case that maybe this is going to be quite unpleasant if they quickly get an h4, h5. I was thinking the game, maybe I can go knight d7, with the idea being that I am trying to basically ensure that I'm in time to neutralize this knight before they get an h4, h5. For example, now if they go h4, I can go h5, but if I'm too slow in doing that, like let's say I play any random move, a6, h4, well, okay, now knight d7, they're gonna play take and trap my bishop. Maybe I can go to c2, but maybe they even like, I don't know, it seems completely like fucked up to me. I'm not gonna do that, right? And I'm also not going to just play like h5 here and allow this pawn structure. This is horrendous. And it turns out there was some logic to what I was thinking, but concretely the issues I thought were problematic in the game actually weren't that severe. For example, I was concerned during the game of something like this happening, takes d4, e6, and d5, then busting through very quickly. And I was looking at this variation, for example, of course I cannot take, but maybe like queen a5 check, bishop d2 takes, bishop f3, and I was thinking like, oh, they have the bishop here, a very open position, they're targeting like weaknesses and stuff, and I thought this was very risky to kind of go into. It's actually not that bad objectively speaking when I like have an engine and I can like actually look at this position from here and not from like here, right, like 10 moves in advance. But there were two issues with this sort of whole thing. Again, one, objectively this position actually wasn't that bad, but two, like none of this was actually forced, in the sense that, like, for example, here I don't have to take and go queen a5. I can actually play like bishop c5, for example, and if queen e4, I get knight f6, and then I attack that. And if they get off the d file, which, I mean, apart from e4, they have no other options, well, then I can just take, and okay, d2 is an ugly square, but then at the very least I can take, and yeah, this is not a very pretty position for white, which basically means this whole like d5 idea was not that scary. But what is a bit unfortunate is that just in general, this is like strategically not very good. If they avoid castling kingside and go queenside instead, long term they do have the bishop pair advantage, and this will have some similarities to the game where basically I'm just going to be quite passive, and it's going to be very difficult for me to find an active plan because any sort of pawn break is going to inevitably also involve opening up the position, which is going to help who? Well, it's going to help white. So that's why I ended up playing this, just because I thought it was safer, and I was sort of correct. I didn't see all the correct reasons as to why, but okay, we ended up getting this position. And basically, by the way, instead of bishop g4, then I said this was kind of inaccurate. What should I have done instead? And basically, I was thinking like maybe around like later on, at this point when I was a bit passive. I know I'm skipping a bit ahead, sorry for that, but I was thinking, man, like if I just went bishop f5 instead of bishop g4, I think this would have been a lot better, because now, how do they harass my bishop and try to win the bishop here? It's not very clear. For example, with knight h4, I can very comfortably go bishop g4. Notice how they don't have a pawn on h3 like they did after bishop g4, h3. So like here, for example, it wouldn't really make that much sense. Okay, there is also g4, which would probably transpose to bishop h5, g4, very likely. But also here in this position, let's say like knight h4, I'd probably have to go back to some awkward square like e6, maybe one of these even, because if I go to g6, then, well, again, they get the bishop here, and I think they have this sort of nice long-term stable advantage. Whereas if I go bishop f5 immediately, then I can comfortably meet this with this. If they go f3 trying to avoid the trade, well, then I just comfortably kick back. And this time I don't really care if they get the bishop here, because once they've played f3, that significantly weakens their position more compared to if they'd went like h3 g4. Like f3 g4 is very different and creates some real weaknesses in their position. So okay though, this is what we end up having in the game. And by the way, I should also note, like, if they don't go knight h4, then after d4, say something like this, we're doing pretty fine, and I would be happy. I probably even had this in my file, but again, I hadn't seen this in a few weeks, and I was a little bit rusty, and I'm not some chessable geek who uses spaced repetition to memorize stuff like 100 times a day. So yeah, this is what we have, and we go for this stuff, and up until now, pretty normal. Queen c3, what's the idea? Basically, white wants to bring the bishop into the game, but immediately they might be slightly concerned about this pawn hanging. I was thinking the game they might go b3, bishop b2, but queen c3 also makes some sense. And if I just gain the tempo, it doesn't really do anything. So at this point, I play a5. I could bring a rook into the game just like this, but a5, I was thinking, first of all, I still no need to really commit my rooks to the center. And I also felt that, in general, what you want to understand is that Black's plans are basically going to be boiled down to going something like, at least generally speaking in the structure, probably playing c5, or maybe under some circumstances playing e5 concretely works out. Otherwise, maybe just trying to attack like the weak d4 point, but it's kind of difficult in this position because white just has so many like pieces defending it. And again, given their long-term advantage of the bishop here, it's very difficult for me to actually engage in any sort of plan that would open the position up, which is why after these moves, I just end up playing, after a bit of thinking, maybe a bit too much thinking as well, rook fe8, just a waiting move. And basically, for this position and quite a few of the following ones, I was just sort of putting the ball in my opponent's court, asking him like, well, okay, I get that you're better, but like, what are you actually going to do? And for example, if he plays d5, which I'm sort of provoking him to do with my queen on b6, right? Well, I am just going to play bishop c5. And then what you want to understand about the bishop pair, of course, is that when they trade one of them off, the bishop pair advantage, like one bishop versus knight, in some positions it's advantageous, but it's usually nowhere near as good as having two bishops versus knight and bishop, because you lose control over both color complexes of the board. So like, for example, takes, you can get a passed pawn, but it's not really going anywhere. I can easily blockade it and maybe even just snatch it up. And also, if you decide to like take and give me a weakness, it doesn't really actually matter that much, because one, how are you going to attack it, and two, I get sort of counterplay in the b file. Maybe my pieces actually aren't that bad, maybe even like e5, e4 is an idea. So okay, that's why my opponent, being of course a strong international master, he did not play d5. He continues actually playing a bit of a waiting game with me, and he's asking me what I'm going to do. But okay, I play h6 after, again, probably a bit too much thinking, asking him though what he's going to do. He hands the ball back over to me, hand the ball back over to him, and this is the first move where he's sort of signaling some sort of like real intention where he's gonna go b4. And the whole time actually, I was thinking the moment he goes a3, I'm gonna go a4, because then when he goes b4, he can't take back with the pawn. But then I realized that logic was actually flawed, because in a lot of these positions, it doesn't really matter that this pawn is quote unquote weak. And the reason is that my b7 pawn is simply weak. Like if I take, for example, also, this is a very big problem. And in addition to that, he's probably going to play rook b1, target the b7 pawn. And this is very difficult to protect. It's a very fragile part of my position, because if I ever play rook b8 like that, bishop f4, and then how do my position doesn't work. So as natural as a4 looked after a3, I realized that I had to look past that superficial aspect of the position and do something else. So I decided to do was play rook c8, and basically this actually nullifies the strength of b4 now, because after takes, I can play this move b5, which is a very typical break in the Caro-Kann. Just to show another position where like there was sort of similar structure, and we had this was way back in 2017 actually. I was like maybe had a FIDE rating just under 2000 at the time, and we had this line of the classical Caro-Kann, and okay, this is a bunch of stuff. And okay, we get this endgame where I'm slightly better, and then eventually I get in this move b5. Very important, and the whole idea is we're basically just challenging the light squares in their position. If they go c5, they give up the d5 square, and this is a long-term weakness they have to deal with. If they take, well, then like they open up the c file, still a weakness. This is also a weakness. We're also targeting the b4 pawn, and if they just keep the tension, well, that's also probably going to result in us just taking and creating more weaknesses for them. So okay, what happened in the game was c5, but concretely this was a little bit suspicious. After bishop f6, I didn't really want to allow any knight e5 ideas coming up, so I stopped that and nip it right in the bud. Rook e3, knight g5. What you need to realize is if they go rook d3 and defend this very directly, I'm going to go a5 smash open the queen side, and this is very problematic. For example, if they just defend it, I get rook a1, and this is all collapsing. If they go rook d1 takes, not hang my rook, take, it all falls apart. So in the game they went rook e3, but unfortunately after knight g5, if they just go take, and like bishop e5, again this doesn't really do much because I just take. If they go rook takes e5, I take and everything falls apart. If they go pawn takes, again a5 at the very least, and I don't see how this is going to be good. They have a lot of weaknesses we can attack. I can't exactly say it's the same for them. If they go h6, g6, and they can push a pawn as much as they want, but it's not really going to go anywhere. So okay, the game wrapped up with takes and a5 as I was talking about, and we had some rook endgame where, again, they tried to push the h-pawn, but eventually they just resigned because they were down a bunch of pawns, and there was no way they could really stop me from racking up for the material gains. But okay, again, coming back to this game, b5, something white kind of wanted to avoid. They'd ideally want to be able to meet it with like b3 maybe. There are some logistical issues with this pawn maybe hanging, but just from a strategic point of view, if they can meet like, you know, b5 with b3, that means that they can hold on to control of the d5 square, which I think is quite important. But okay, he ended up going for something slightly different, playing a4, really trying to shut down the queen side. Actually a bit surprising because you might think like, oh, doesn't white really want to go b4? But a4 is really interesting because even though white sort of does have a pawn majority on the queen side, maybe you also have to understand they have the bishop pair, very long-term advantage, and they still have potential to play long-term on the king side. So I wouldn't write a move like a4 off, and I definitely didn't in the game, as, you know, closing things down too much and making things too drawish. But okay, again, the evaluation of the position hasn't changed too much. I'm still a bit worse. Nothing like losing, but like I can't really go for any super optimistic active plans like b5, for example. They could just go b3, but they could also maybe go takes, queen d3 pinning the pawn, and this also is looking kind of ugly. If I go like rook b8 and try to keep the tension, maybe they just go bishop e2. I'm not completely sure, I haven't looked at it specifically. No, I think they probably just take, because if rook takes b5, bishop e2, and if they take the queen, takes, and bishop c6 is a nasty fork. But okay, we have some shuffling about. Again, queen b6, if they go d5 this time, bishop c5 wasn't my idea this time around. I was actually planning on going queen d8, and now they cannot take or push because, well, the rook's gonna hang. So rook b d1, I bring my queen back to d8. It didn't really serve any purpose on a6 anymore. I wasn't going to be gaining b5, so decided to come around this way. And yeah, I mean, like, I don't have a super easy plan, but again, like, does white have a super easy plan? Not really. So, like, again, in general, you don't really want to play this sort of position against a higher rated opponent where you are kind of just stuck with a slightly worse position. This is usually something you want to avoid. Usually when you play a stronger opponent, you want to try and make things as complicated as possible to try and maximize the chances that they'll screw up, because usually in a simple position, the stronger player is usually just going to kind of outplay you eventually. But okay, these were the cards that I was stuck with at this point. I have to play them as well as I can. And I was lucky because on this move, queen e1, my opponent definitely was actually already starting to misplay it, where I noticed at this point that, okay, maybe he wants to go over to the queen side and do some fancy crap, I don't know. But at this very moment, what matters is that his pieces are not the best coordinated in the world. In particular, what I mean by that is this rook is really a bit loose given our two minor pieces on this file. So how did I manage to exploit this? Well, first of all, I was thinking, oh, I'm going to go like bishop b4, I'm going to like put my bishop on that nice square, but from there it's not going to do anything, and I'm just going to have to sit and do nothing. But then I realized if I actually just leave my like bishop here for now and instead make use of this very small window of opportunity that I have, I can actually play e5. And now they cannot really take because the rook is of course hanging. Not only that, but like, there's also this e4 fork that they have to deal with. If they like move the bishop back, trying to avoid that, I can actually still go e4. And the issue is, guys, is that if they move the rook here, which is the only squares it can go to, then I'm going to get bishop b4. And look at that, right? So what they end up having to settle for is bishop d2, which I found before I played e5. I spent quite a bit of time thinking this because it's a very committal move, right? If like it's not good, it could be bad news, right? So I spent quite a bit of time analyzing bishop d2. My opponent, after I played e5, he completely missed it. Ended up finding bishop d2. It's like the only move pretty much to like handle this threat. Okay, I take the d4 pawn though, and we get this very radical change of structure now. The game is completely shifted. And how do you evaluate this, right? So, okay, white has a bishop here, but I have like this protected pass d pawn. A lot of people look at the pass d pawn and think that black is just better. It's actually not really the case. I kind of thought this was around equal because I recognize there's always like this sneaky long-term maybe pass pawn potential white has on the queen side. Not to mention they have the bishop here, especially this light squared bishop. Very annoying to deal with actually. So I felt like if I could somehow, like if these bishops disappeared from the board, I would be better. I would be. That's indisputable because then I'll just have a protected pass d pawn and they don't have a bishop pair to show for it. If I could somehow transport my knight onto a dark square on the queen side, that would just be like positionally dominating. So, okay, what happened though from here is he goes a5 after some thinking. I wasn't 100% sure what he was going to do, but a5 makes sense. It feels quite critical. Of course, I don't do anything. It's just going to push, and that's going to be annoying. So I take it. Queen f8. I don't want to hang my queen d2. And this is a moment where I start going a bit wrong, where I'm too antsy to do something. I play bishop d8. But then after b4, I'm confronted with this issue that if I just take the pawn and after takes, he's attacking my queen. And if I go something like this, takes, he's going to take. And maybe I can like try and attack the pawn or something. But I am at the end of the day down. Just a pawn quite simply, and I don't know, it feels a little bit maybe unnecessary. So what I end up doing is I take a bit of a risk and I give him this outside pass pawn, which after the game my opponent criticized quite heavily, basically just saying like that I'm a moron for doing this. He didn't use those exact words, but he basically said that yeah, he thought this was just a clear mistake, and in hindsight I definitely agree. But during the game I thought things were a bit not so simple because I thought I had a lot of concrete opportunities attacking this as a weakness, also like using my knight to get active, like concrete counterplay. But at the end of the day, it was very fragile what I was aiming for and didn't really have a firm sort of like foundation. It was just kind of hope chess in a way. I try to circle the pawn a little bit. I go knight d7, he takes, and some of these moves weren't the most accurate, but I'll show you like a real sort of turning point in the game where knight e5 happens. I attack the knight, also attack his bishop, also attack the pawn, bishop d5, and we're both very low on time at this point. You can see I'm below a minute on the clock. I go rook d7, and objectively this is a mistake. But he plays something weird here where he goes a6 very quickly, disregarding completely the idea of my last move, which is take on d5. And at this point, things were like really, I was like, what the hell is going on? I thought I was winning, to be honest, because after takes, the idea is this looks incredibly fucking scary because if you move your king to either of these squares, knight f3 wins the queen. If you go here, queen h1, and then I win this. And I don't think you're like pushing this pawn to victory. I don't think that's happening. But what I did not seriously consider, not that I completely missed it, was that after f3 here, white is actually doing okay. If I take this with the queen, then this is actually just completely losing for me. And if I go knight takes f3, this is in fact only really a draw because I'm only going to have like a perpetual check in a bunch of these lines and basically nothing more actually, sadly as it is. However, I was lucky that my opponent, not only did he blunder with a6, but that he also tried to go all the way with a7. When after knight takes c4, I eliminate the threat to this, and after queen f4, at the very least have the option to go back to b6, guard a8, and it's not very clear that what he's doing actually works. Unfortunately, I started misplaying this, and I went knight b6 here, which is actually sort of okay, but I already miscalculated, which is a bad sign usually, that after queen a8, which is what I wanted to play, just blockading the pawn. Of course, the queen is not always the best blockader, but concretely it just sort of works. I dismissed this though for the wrong reason, that I thought queen b8 check would be annoying, since of course you don't want to take it, but I simply missed that after rook d8, that this is actually a check. Because in my head I was thinking, after this they're going to take, I have to take back, and then they're going to promote. But of course that is just simply not the case at all, because the king is in check. And for some reason, this was just a blind spot to me that, like, when we come back, this is, again, I feel like I'm repeating myself at this point, but he went queen f4. And also, by the way, earlier, I should say this was objectively just not working at all, like my whole rook d7 idea, and I was probably lost after queen e2, attacking my knight. And more importantly, after takes f3, it's just like, there's no way to really make this whole attack work. It's basically just complete and utter trash. But again, I was lucky, and I slightly put myself in not the most comfortably winning position, but okay, after rook b1, this is still absolutely fine. I have to be slightly careful to not just lose this. So I go rook d6. Idea is that now I can meet this with this and keep control of the queen in square. Queen f3, so what he's trying to do is take, and then queen. I should also note, though, in this position after rook b1, I think I was also considering briefly going rook d7, just trying to attack this pawn directly, since after, like, takes, of course, if I can get, like, just 2 pawns up in this endgame with these being the 2 extra pawns, I'd be easily winning, but I am losing due to rook b8. However, after this, the situation changes slightly, and I'm not sure whether I didn't see this in the game. I think I did, but I must have hallucinated something crazy or just forgotten that after rook d7 now, takes doesn't really work because I can just take this. And because the queen is on f3, not f4, rook b8 is not like an idea to be concerned about. Instead, I got down to 1 second on the clock and I threw the whole game away with queen f8. And after rook takes b6, I don't know why I played queen f8, to be honest. I got down to 1 second and I just like moved my hand somewhere. Yeah. There's not really any excuses for this, by the way. I don't want to like be like poor me, but yeah, this was really heart-wrenching, to be honest, this loss. And it happened almost like a month ago. These recaps are coming a bit late. But yeah, I remember after this game, I was really just like, because like, okay, first of all, I don't get to play, well, in Australia, it's very rare that you actually get to play players of this level, even though like international master in the big scheme of things is not like that amazing. Like in America, I swear they're like, if you live in the right state, you can play against, like, even if you're a 2000, you've probably played against more GMs like than the average 2200 has here in Australia, which is kind of interesting to think about. But yeah, I was really heartbroken, I guess you could say, after rook d8 happened, and sorry, after I just played queen f8. Like, what the hell? There's no explanation behind this move. The only sort of redeeming thing is that, like, I can go rook d8. Like, I think in my head I wanted to play knight a8, rook d8 or something, and sort of then just push the pawn up the board. The issue, of course, is just that, like, they just take and doesn't really do much. And after rook d8, concretely, you can't really push these pawns up in time. It's just too slow. The computer gives this line as the best one, and yeah, you basically have 2 queens against the rook and queen. I was a bit lucky, but again, at this point I was already like so psychologically like fucked in the head that I just like was not capable of finding good moves. I was just like moving back and forth. Still actually not completely sure that I was losing because like I'm only down a pawn, but unfortunately what came to be was just that my pieces were paralyzed. I can't move again if I take the pawn. I hang rook d8. It turns out I can actually go c4, sacrifice a pawn, deflect the queen away from attacking this, and then get queen e7 to sort of pin down this pawn if they defend that. Sorry, like well, first of all, they take this, I actually get queen b7 check, and I fork this and this. And if they try to, well, after takes like defend it, then I'm just going to go this, deflect their queen away, and then eventually I win this. And this is going to be a very easy draw bit. But okay, I wasn't like seriously calculating this point. I'm sort of in panic mode with a minute on the clock. And that was actually my last chance after queen c8. After this, I'm actually just losing, unfortunately. The rook comes to d7, which serves now the multi-purpose function of not only defending this, but attacking this as well. So both of my pieces are basically tied down. I go rook c8, and it's basically just a matter of time until my position completely collapses. And I accelerate the process in the game here by, after queen c7, going rook c8, allowing rook takes f7, unfortunately, where if I take this, then I hang this, and then they queen, so I went queen e8, but of course I'm just going to be getting mated after this, so I resigned it finally in this position. So yeah, while this game in many ways was imperfect and ultimately I ended up losing, there were also some good things about it, right? Like, I had definitely some optimism with regards to the fact that I felt like for a lot of the game I was playing on my opponent's level. And okay, like definitely slightly worse for a lot of it because of the choices I made in the opening, but definitely for much of the game was not much worse than that, and definitely after e5 in particular had really started to change the tide of the game. And probably at this point, I think again, like this bishop d8 thing that I did probably wasn't that good. I should have kept the bishop on the square and tried to be able to meet b4 with just simply taking and then exchange that pawn for them getting the d1 instead of them having like this outside passed a pawn they had. But even here I still had some chances, and it was just very pitiful that I ended up completely throwing this away. Like a very big opportunity to be on like 4.5 out of 7, then play maybe even someone stronger in the penultimate round of the tournament. But okay, still, you can't dwell too much over these sorts of losses. You have to sort of take them as they come, right? But yeah, anyways, that's going to be it for the video. If you guys liked it, please leave a like. If you have any comments about what is going on with your life, leave a comment. But yeah, anyways, see you guys until next time.